as I mentioned on Friday, the shocking thing about this book is the way that it's written, the format that it's written, the style. And you'll see that right here in this paragraph. We read this on Friday. And he continues in this vein. But the way that he writes, it's as if you're reading the Hamburg Beis Din writing against the reformers. That's how it sounds. And in fact, the paragraph that he introduces the entire book with is a paraphrase of the paragraph that they began Eile Divrei Habris with. We mentioned that the other day. Except that he turns some of the words on their head, and then he calls Eile Divrei Habris Motzei Diba, which is an acronym for Eile Divrei Habris, Diba, which means Lashon Hara. And he's really accusing, like the Hamburg Beis Din folks, of destroying Judaism. So, I think, as I mentioned, there's a few angles to it. One is that I think he does see it that way. He is turning it on its head. He sees their sort of lack of integration of the Enlightenment to be something that's going to destroy Judaism. Maybe he really sees it that way. I think the early reformers did see it that way, at least for a very little while. I mean, soon it quickly became, something much more radical. But now, also, I think as I mentioned last time, what really makes this book make sense is to understand that it's a very different undertaking. There's an academic article that looks at this book. It's an article in Hebrew by a professor named Friedlander. And this is the article that really made sense of this book for me, because I just could not understand where this was coming from. It sounded like I was reading, the work of the Chassam Sofer 50 years later against the Reform. And I don't know if there's like a little aspect of him, sort of becoming his persecutors, or there's a syndrome like that. But there's at least one opinion that the style of that this book is early Hebrew, sort of the most stark example perhaps of early modern Hebrew satire, and that's how it's being written. And that actually, it's polemical, clearly, but that the style is satire. And that actually, I think, helps me to at least understand the book. Without that, it's very hard to understand. And so this is the kind of writing he does. We have no leader like we used to have. Everybody does hayashar be'einav ya'aseh. These are all quotes from the Talmud and from the rabbis and from the Torah and from Nevi'im. I mean, he's a tremendous Talmid Chacham. Everybody does what they want in their own eyes. And so many from the Jewish people have, gone out on bad paths. They've forgotten Shabbat and they've forgotten the Moeds. They've forgotten the holidays. They don't ask, what God wants. They don't call in the name of God. And then he says, and there were these three men in our midst. Who are the three men? That's the Hamburg Beis Din. The Jewish people are suffering spiritually, and these three people in our midst, they have eyes and they do not see. They walk in darkness. The world is being destroyed in front of them, and the cries of Judah are crying out. This is a quote from Eicha from the Book of Lamentations. Ki hofer brit Elokeinu, the covenant of our God has been annulled, destroyed, which was put in our flesh. Now, of course, this is a pun on Eile Divrei Habrit, right? In other words, he's saying, let's see, we have somebody new here. Hi, Gary. Which Gary are you? Just wondering who's here. All right. So he's saying that it's a double entendre. In other words, what he's recognizing, what the Hamburg Beis Din's recognizing, is that people have forsaken the covenant with God. But of course, he's also saying, you, the Hamburg Bezdin, have forsaken the covenant by writing a book called Eile Divrei Habrit. These are the words of the covenant, right? That's the irony. You're saying, I want to preserve the covenant. These are the words of the covenant, but it's precisely your book that is causing, that is a lack of addressing the Jewish people, having already lost kind of the covenant. I think that's what he's saying. The covenant that Abraham made and that stood for Jacob and for Israel. Ve'inish sam alev, nobody pays attention to it. Everybody does what they want. Ein omer v'ein dvarim b'linishma kolam. And nothing is said, and their voice is not heard. These are all quotes from Tanakh. And what he's saying is the Hamburg Bezdin's voice is the wrong voice, not being heard. Bachu b'mistarim, they're crying, in hiddenness. So the pasuk should be a time to do for God. We have forsaken His Torah, which is used by the Talmud as a way of doing certain things that might be forbidden, but you can do them to preserve Judaism. And so what he's saying has multiple levels here, right? One level is that's what the reformers are doing, and this is the justification for it. Which isn't crazy, but he changes the word to hefiru brito. They have forsaken His covenant, right? Which is a play on Eile Divrei Habrit. These are the words of the covenant, the name of their book. And he's saying this is a time to do for God. So get rid of that book, Eile Divrei Habrit, and do for God. Right? He's obviously quite convinced that tweaking things toward an enlightenment path is going to be positive. Remember, they weren't the original book, or Noga, which was just written, half a year before. Not that radical. It's arguing for an organ on weekdays, using the current language, I guess German, for prayer, and speeches, I think, in the vernacular. I think that was the other thing. Those are not the craziest things. It's different than it's going to be, in 1850. I mean, this is much more tame. The desire of the reformers. Ach bezot ya'atu lanu ha'anashim l'shevet itanu. V'himo lanu kol zachar kasher heim nimulim. It's a little hard to understand. This, of course, is a quote from the Torah: circumcise every male. So people will be with us, will be together because we're all circumcised. In other words, now could be the very early reform did want to get rid of circumcision. Now, whether by 1819 they already are suggesting that, I'm not sure. We have to look that up. It seems a little early for that. There's a Shimona Hamorim. Listen to me, you rebellious ones, right? This is a quote from Moses hitting the rock. Hello, Aleichem HaMitzvah. This commandment is upon you, right? He's sort of screaming, yelling at the Hamburg Bezdin. Why aren't you doing what you need to do? Zot habrita shetishmu. This is the covenant which you need to keep. Why don't you keep it? Hello, atem hamtim et am Hashem. You are, you're killing the Jewish people. This is also a quote from the Torah. Asher lo hikamtem et divrei habrit, who do not keep the words of the covenant. But he's really digging into the Hamburg Bezdin. Habitu no re'eh, look and see. Banenu v'notenu megudolim dor shelo heichim libo. This is a generation that has grown, that doesn't have the Jewish heart. Lo ne'mana el kel rucho. They aren't faithful to God. Lo yadu, they don't know the God of Israel. They desecrate the God of Israel. B'shel mi hara azot. Who is to blame for this? This is unbelievable. Hello, mi'edchem haita. This is from your hand. It's your fault, he's saying to the Hamburg Bezdin, that the Jewish people are going astray. Kilo alitem beprutza. You didn't stand in the breach and shore up the fence. Right? So it's interesting. In other words, it's sort of funny, right? Because their goal is to shore up the fence, to circle the wagons. And he's saying precisely the opposite would have been the case. Had you, tuned into the needs of the Enlightenment Jews at this moment, that would be to shore up the fence. You don't shore up the fence by by building bigger fences. Why have you brought the Jews to this desert? Right, obviously, again, a quote, Im yesh devar Hashem itchem piguna Hashem tzvakot levilti safot harvot al hatzmeya. They need water, the Jewish people. Our children have been given to another nation. They have they could choose good and not evil. Hein eralam tzaku chutzo malchi shalom. But the problem is these three men are among us. Will the sons and daughters, of the Jewish people be saved? They have forsaken the sheep. Right now, it's exactly what the Hamburg Bezdin, right? This is how you would imagine the Hamburg Bezdin writing, right? They're saying, we got to shore up the fences because the Jewish people are going astray. It's the fault of the reformers and the Enlightenment. He's saying just the opposite. It's you who's causing it. The Jewish people are being like sheep without a shepherd. It's a quote from Moshe. He says, please call out in the name of your God. Now, this is also a quote from Tanakh. This is from, I think, Eliyahu when he is with the Nevi'ei Habal, with the prophets of Baal. And he sets up the situation in which he puts an animal on the altar and pours water over it. And a fire comes out from heaven and consumes it. And he says to the Nevi'ei Habal, the prophets of Baal, he says, why don't you call out to your God and do the same thing? But no fire came from the heavens to for the prophets of Baal. I mean, basically accusing the Hamburg Bezdin of these terrible things. They've eaten the forbidden parts of the animal. They've worn the wool. They've eaten the fat of the sheep. They've worn its wool, but they don't guide them as shepherds. That's a really interesting turn of phrase. He's basically saying, you're taking advantage of the Jewish people, like, I guess they're paying you or whatever, but you're not shepherding them. Madua tisnasu al kal Hashem, right? This, of course, is a quote from Korach, which says to Moses and Aaron, why are you raising yourself above the people? And he quotes that. He says, if you'll say in your hearts, Ha'ir Rabbati, the city is filled with people. Kahal Rav Ma'od, it's a very big congregation. Right now, if your argument, Hamburg Bezdin, is going to be, there's lots of religious Jews. The people who are sinners are a small number. Let's just get rid of them, cut them off, and then the Jewish people will be safe. Right? That's obviously what the Hamburg Bezdin is thinking. Hanefesh hachotat avonatisa. The one that sins should bear its sin. Dama barosha, its blood is on its head. V'anachnu nekayem, and we will continue. Right? Let's say that's what you're thinking. Ko yitenu elikim b'chol Yosef ki b'nafshochem dibartem d'darazeh lama lo dibartem l'hazhir rasha midarko hama'athu imrav. He says, but that's not a good argument, Hamburg Bezdin, because you need to address the wicked, whether they're small or large. Right? He's saying basically your, expression of, the anti-reform is not addressing them. The way that you address them, he's basically saying, is our way of I guess, reformation. Now, of course, it's not just like, there's all of a sudden reform, right? We're talking about there's an enlightenment going on. And in a way, what you see is that the early reformers besides just imagine them to be, we want to be Germans in the street, but really it's a lot more like sort of later conservative Judaism in a sense. It's the same sentiment that, they're trying to preserve, they're trying to rescue Judaism. And this is a quote from Megillus Esther. You can't just turn away your concern from the Jews. Hemalo avonam yisau, hema et avonam yisau vatem lo tenaku. You can't just say to yourself, they will bear their sin and we will be clean. Al yichul bavchem koatem harabim. Don't say, we're wise, God wants us. Kishav gam yashis beno haim min haderach asher darka ba v'teinu elaman she'Hashem imenu l'tzriya min ha'smol b'seichem hayehem. Ki haminag chaya elef shanim pa'amayim al kein amad ta'amo b'recho lo ne'emar Torah yaseh. This is a quote from. Trying to see what his argument is. It's so flowery. It's really, everything is a quote from that. So halo itchem nahag v'yolid choshech lo or. You are trying to, you think you're guiding the people, but you're just bringing darkness and not light. This, of course, is a reference to the original book, or Noga, which was a light is shed. Du na uru, he says, please know and see. Hatzon b'haba kar nahagu chadashim mikarov bo. The sheep have been guided from new things. Lo sha'aruma avotenu amnam lo darkchem derachenu. Your way is not our way. Ki Hashem shaftenu, Hashem achokekenu, l'mekim l'kenu, olam bo'ed hu yinagenu. God will guide us. It's just wild how rabbinic he writes. Okay, we'll see a little bit more of this. And I'm going to skip some pages, some different parts. But it goes on this way. The book basically has three parts. First is this sort of polemical, satirical, not satire in a frivolous way, but, and then he gets into more halachic things later in the book. But it's first 30 pages of sort of one quote from Tanakh after another. That's, a pun also. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.